Hello, everyone out there. You're welcome once again to What's It We Speak TV. I'm very excited today because we are getting to 500 subscribers. Thank you out there for your support and your love for the channel. I would urge you to continue again to subscribe and also share, of course, the link to other students and people who are generally interested in history. Today, I want us to look at a very important topic. We are still on the transatlantic slave trade. We are not done with the transatlantic slave trade. So today we are going to look at the suppression or the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. So the suppression, the abolition, what brought about the abolition of the slave trade? Why did the Europeans now decided to abolish the trade? And that's what today we will look at. So I'll urge you to take your seat and listen to, of course, what's in history TV. Good. So let's go to our slides for today. So we are looking at the abolition and suppression. And then after that, we will look at the continuation of the trade. So even after the abolition and the suppression, the trade still continued. So we will look at the factors that led to that, even though he said that the slave trade had been abolished. However, we see that the trade was still ongoing among some people. And so today we will look at the reasons that led to that as well, the continuation of the transatlantic slave trade, especially in the Gold Coast, even when the Europeans had abolished the trade. Good. So let's begin with our discussion for today. Let's look at our lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, we are supposed to be able to discuss the factors that led to the suppression or the abolition of the slave trade. So if you are asked anywhere to talk about the factors that led to the suppression and the abolition of the slave trade, at the end of this discussion, you should be able to do that. Fantastic. Then we should be able to also identify the reasons that led to the continuation of the slave trade in Ghana despite the British abolition in 1807. So, in Ghana, for instance, or the Gold Coast was ruled or colonized by the British. And so, after the British abolished the slave trade, why the trade still continued even in the Gold Coast as well. So let's begin with the first one, the factors that led to or that informed the abolition of the slave trade. The first factor that led to the abolition of the slave trade in the Gold Coast and in Britain was the Act of 1807, which was actually signed in the British Parliament. And per this act, it abolished slavery and made the transportation of slaves from Africa to British colonies or to Britain as illegal. So per this act, if you are caught, if you were a British and you were caught transporting or dealing in slaves, you were going to be punished by the law. Even though other European countries had also legal, what do you call it, criminalized slave trade, because if you look at Denmark was the first European country to abolish the slave trade in 1803. But the British passed the law that made slave trade illegal, and so this anti-law slave trade was passed by the British, and then by this law, Of course, what happened was that the British government then decided to free all slaves in Britain and then pay a compensation, an amount to the owners, the slave owners, a tune of about 20 million euros as at that time, to all the slave owners who were affected by this law. Because by this act, slavery in British and in British colonies or empires were abolished. And so they were supposed to free all slaves in Britain. And that amount to loss because these people were bought with money. So if you ask me to free them, then you must pay me the money that I used to to pay them. So that's the first factor that led to, or that informed, the abolition of the slave trade. The next one was the pro-abolitionists. So we also had some people who equally showed concern about the trade, or the slave trade, or slavery in general. And these people were known as the abolitionists or the pro-abolitionists. That's the early people who actually began to campaign against this inhuman treatment meted out to a fellow human being. An example of such people were Pope Leo, of course, the 10th of Rome, and then King Nzaga Mbemba of Congo, then King Agaja of Dahomey. These people, initially spoke against the whole issue of slave trade or slavery, and so their activities or their campaign also informed the abolition of the slave trade. The next factor was the humanitarian factors. Some people also campaigned against slavery based on humanitarian grounds, that slavery was evil, was not good, that it wasn't good, it wasn't human to treat a fellow human being in that way. And some of these men who spoke against the slave trade and slavery were, Gavin Sharp, Thomas Clarkson, Henry Totton, William Wilberforce, and Foxwell Baxton, and others. And William Wilberforce, for instance, was the one who championed the Act of 1807, that is the passing of the anti-law slave bill. He was the one who championed it in the British Parliament for that act to be passed. So these people, as you've seen some of their images here, actually were the ones who spearheaded, or their activities also informed the abolition of the slave trade. Sometimes, for instance, Wilberforce, again, he was a lawyer. He also defended some of the runaway slaves, in court. Because in those days, if you run away as a slave, you were taken to court. Now, these people also formed a society. These humanitarian. If we say that somebody is a humanitarian, somebody who cares for the needy, the less privileged in society. So these people came together, formed a society, called the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade. And what they decided to do was that after slavery was abolished in 1807, the free slaves were actually given the opportunity to go back to Africa. And so these people would send, or in Britain, for instance, would send all their free slaves to Sierra Leone. Okay, and even after the 1807 Act, the British government also set out navies on the high seas to patrol and check incoming, slave ships. So if they capture any slave ship, they resettle or send the slaves back to Sierra Leone. So you could be asked that where did the British resettle their freed slaves or slaves in Africa? It was Sierra Leone. Not only them, if you go to the US too as well, because after the British abolished slave trade in 1807, they also put pressure on other other countries to also abolish or also do so. And the US, was an example of such. The US also abolished slave trade, and what they also did was that They also set up the American Colonization Society in 1816, and these people were concerned about the abolition of what slave trade in the United States. So after the abolition in the US as well, the free slaves were also taken to Liberia. Those who wanted to come back to Africa were also taken to Liberia, and that's how come when you look at the Liberian flag, it resembles that of the US flag. It's almost the same, but just one star. All right, and even their capital town, Monrovia, was named after their president, James Monroe, at that time. So let's move on to the next factor. Now, legitimate trade was also a factor that informed the abolition of the slave trade. Now, when we say legitimate trade, what do we mean by legitimate trade? Legitimate trade is the trade in product or commodities other than what slaves. When we were dealing with the slave trade initially, I told you that human beings or slaves were seen as commodities, items of trade. But in legitimate trade, we are going to trade in commodities other than human beings, which then means that human beings in legitimate trade are not going to be commodities. You understand? But they are going to be probably traders. Now, example of such commodities that they were going to trade in was cotton, granite, palm oil, minerals, coffee, timber, and rubber. So these were the commodities that we were going to trade in, other than trading in humans. That is what we mean by legitimate trade. And the British developed interest in this type of trade, mainly because of the Industrial Revolution, which had begun in Britain at this period, because at this period they had many machines which they needed raw materials to feed these machines, and therefore there was a need for them to develop and promote this type of trade so that they can actually have raw materials for their industry. And so somebody can argue out that this was, of course, from a selfish interest perspective. Well, let's move on. Yes, so the Industrial Revolution, as I just earlier mentioned, was also a factor because of the change over from the use of human hands in the production of goods and services, meant that the slaves were no more needed in Europe as before. So you realize that slaves were needed for labor, but now we have machines, we have harvesters, machines that are harvesting the cotton, the granite, all these plantations have machines which are doing that job. And so there was no need for the use of machines. And so Europe or Europeans were actually not in need of human labor, but rather what? Because raw materials to feed those industries. Okay, you remember when there was a redundancy in one of the mining companies? First, if you were using manual labor, now you have machines to do the work. So you only need one person to actually operate the machine. Okay, and the use of the machines in the production of goods and services was much also faster and less costly. You wouldn't have to feed a lot of slaves and all of that, and you could also manufacture more, a lot of of course, manufacture more than using human hands, as compared to that. Let's look at the other one. There was the other one too was another factor that led to or that informed the abolition of the slave trade was that of the slave revolts. Some of the slaves also revolted and caused many chaos. Some often killed their masters, they destroyed properties. If you watch this movie, for instance, 12 Years Slave, that movie is actually what do you call it? A true story. A true story whereby the slave rebelled, ran away, and decided to kill all the white masters around. So he comes to your house, he kills your children, kills you, kill your wife, kill everybody, enters to the next house, kill the white master, kill the wife, kill the children. And so the Europeans actually became fed up, with all these constant rebellions of the slaves, and so they had to actually give out, these actually to give, freedom to these slaves so that they could be free. So these were some of the reasons that inform the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. However, after the abolition of the trade in the 18th century, the slave trade still continued, and these were the reasons that led to the continuation of the slave trade, despite the British abolition in 1807. So the first one was that the trade continued because it was very profitable, to both the European buyers and the Ghanaian slave traders. So people were getting a lot of money from the slave trade, and so they were not ready to actually stop the trade. The next one was that though the slave trade had been abolished by the British in 1807, the abolition did not affect other European countries. The slave buyers in these nations continued to buy slaves. So you see, 1807, Britain had abolished hers, but the other European countries had not. And so, if British subjects are refusing to buy the slaves, then it means that other European countries, slave traders will come in, and the Ghanaian or the West African would sell the slave to the other European countries, until all the European countries at a point in time decided to end the slave trade. Again, many powerful states in Ghana, in present-day Ghana, like the Asante, the Denchira, the Akwemo, and even if you go to Nigeria, the Dahomey, the Aja people and Co, the Ido people, all these people were empires that needed, weapons, that needed firearms, to expand and maintain their kingdoms. And so the selling of slaves was also the easiest means of obtaining some of these firearms. So you exchange the slave with what? A firearms. And so that was a problem, because Asante had a lot of vassal states. Asante, for instance, had a lot of vassal states. And he needed to keep these vassal states in check, and she needed weapons, and the easiest way to get these weapons was to go in for slaves. So the capture and sale of slaves was also the quickest and easiest means of acquiring wealth for many individuals. It's like the job that we call robbery, the quickest and easiest way. Pickpocketing, the quickest and easiest way to get money. So yes, of course, money acquired illegal is very quick, but the consequences are very dead. And the last one, I think, was the availability of slaves in the homes of chiefs and rich people also helped the trade to go on. So there were commodities also available. So since the commodity is available, then nothing will stop it from being sold. That was also a problem. Good. Thank you very much for your time for today. You try your hands on this work. This is actually in May-June 2016, and the question was identify 5 ways by which the Europeans and Ghanaians profited from the transatlantic slave trade. Good. We shall meet some other time. Subscribe to the channel and recommend it to your friends and others to also do same. Bye-bye.